Okay, brilliant. All right, great. Thanks a lot, Anna, for the introduction. Lots of interesting stuff coming up with trauma care, which is awesome. And welcome everyone this evening to part two, the elephant on the road, emotions in pre-hospital care, beyond the scenes. So there's quite a lot of people looking on the chat here, which is awesome. So thank you very much for coming out. So let me just give you a quick outline of what I'll be talking about tonight. So I'm going to give you a quick refresh from part one. I appreciate there might be some people here who weren't on part one. If you want to catch up, it is available, I believe, on the Trauma Care platform and on the YouTube channel. But I'll do a quick refresh anyway, just so you get the key points, because they will feed into what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the evening. And then in terms of the main bulk of the content, in terms of the format, we've got some discussion on social theories. Really important, again, underpinning a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today. And then the bulk, the core of the session will be going beyond the scenes, as is the title for part two. So again, the emphasis will be around the non-clinical aspects of pre-hospital care, around emotions. So that'll be interesting to delve into. Then I'll give a quick summary, talk about what's next, because I've wrapped up the two-part series. Just some recommendations in relation to a lot of the ideas that I've discussed over the webinars, some signposting, and then how some details on how you can follow up with me if you'd like to after tonight's session. So again, a quick trigger warning, like last time. I am talking about emotions. I'm talking about non-clinical aspects. So there is a range of intense and emotive topics discussed, as you can see on slides. So if at any point you feel like you need to step out and then come back, or you want to revisit at another time once it's recorded and uploaded, or if you want to reach out again, I'll signpost some resources. You can reach out to me, and we'll go from there. So yeah, there's a trigger warning. So now we're going to get into the bulk of the session. So as I said, a quick refresh. So at the center of this webinar series has been this cycle. It's the emotional cycle of healthcare provision. And essentially what it is it maps out how emotions are a big part of our encounters with patients before, during, and after. So before we will receive a call to a job, and on our way to the call, there's a lot of things involved in preparing for the call itself, for the job. And then during, we have what we call emotional labor. So this is something that we perform for ourselves and for our patients and our colleagues. And then after any patient encounter, there's emotional processing. So it's just I'll drop the definition I like to use, is dealing with feeling and giving it meaning. So because of all the residue and effects of performing that emotional labor, we have to process everything that we've experienced and encountered during the interaction with a patient. And then we end up going in a cycle. So the way to break it down is we can end up experiencing this cycle either as a vicious cycle or a virtuous cycle. So if we experience a vicious cycle before the encounter, it could be marked by people feeling stressed, anxious, insecure, maybe because of lack of training and exposure. And then during the patient encounter, if emotional labor hasn't gone well, people can feel overwhelmed, experience trauma, which I'll be discussing a lot tonight. Feel like they've not got control. It might lead to errors and unsafe practice. So a lot of those issues can lead to a lot of things needing processing afterwards. So that can be people feeling burnt out or fatigued, not even processing the emotions, feeling fear or sad, or feeling like they've lost confidence, motivation, and focus because they've had a bad experience, in particular, performing that emotional labor. And then it can also disrupt life away from work, which I'll talk about as well tonight. And then you can end up in this cycle where things keep exacerbating. Whereas if people experience a virtual cycle, it could be that during that preparation phase, they've had enough training exposure, they feel prepared, they can come up with a plan, and when they're performing emotional labor during an encounter, they can have that balance between being detached and connected, developing a good rapport and connection, having a good interaction with their colleagues and with patients, being able to manage the environment. Like I said last session, for me, pre-hospital care is about optimizing the relationship between people and the environment to make the medicine happen. And emotions are a big part of that. So if we have a virtual cycle, then we can perform those things well. And then a virtual cycle in terms of emotional processing, what it looks like is having a healthy work-life balance, is being able to have that time and space and support to recharge and refocus and actually process any residue from the labor. So it's being able to filter and flush and give things a meaning that will enable them people to perform well thereafter. So that was a quick summary. Of part one of the emotional cycle. And now we're going to go beyond the scenes. I was struggling to actually come up with a word. Do I go beyond the cycle, beyond behind the scenes? But instead, I want to talk beyond because they all merge, as you'll see as I delve into it a bit more. So before I talk a bit more about beyond the scenes, I want to talk about some key social theories underpinning the rest of the session. So I'm going to talk about trauma, the concept of trauma, but trauma-informed practice. And then I'm going to talk about performativity and dramaturgy. I won't delve into them a lot, but hopefully it'll make sense once I delve into it a bit more. So first of all, trauma. So we are here tonight with trauma care. And as you can tell with a lot of what Anna mentioned in terms of the conferences, courses, a lot of trauma care is centered around emergency and critical care. You know, the when you look at the etymology of the word trauma, it's actually Greek for wound. But in this context, for this session, when I'm talking about trauma, I'm talking about emotional trauma. And the key features of emotional trauma is usually it's an intense experience that'll have a powerful influence. And what usually marks it being a traumatic experience is something distressing, harmful, life-threatening. Um, but moreover, it's like I said about powerful influence. It has the power to overwhelm people. It can be difficult to manage and control, and it has negative effects. So that basically break down the meaning of emotional trauma. And as practitioners, as we're all aware, we witness so many different types of emotional trauma quite frequently. So, particularly in pre-hospital setting, we can have high exposure. It can be various types of trauma. So it's such a wide range, and the experience is relative to the individual. So I'm not going to talk about pediatrics and obstetrics like I did in the last session because that's the origins of my research into emotions in pre-hospital care. But of course, I talked about why I picked those is because usually they're the two most feared groups of patients. They're high intensity, low frequency. But ultimately, everyone has their own experiences, their own thresholds, all own triggers, and ultimately, therefore, um, what is a traumatic experience will vary between us amongst us as practitioners. So the concept of trauma-informed practice, in a nutshell, I'm not going to delve into it a lot of detail again, but um, trauma-informed practice is kind of merging patient and family-centered care. So again, it's about recognizing the individual, but on top of it, it also talks about recognizing the dynamics of trauma. Again, like I mentioned about it being an intense experience, but with the additional caveat of time that the effects of trauma can be long lasting and also impact people's well-being holistically. So many different dynamics from not only psychological but financial, social, emotional. And the other thing that I like about the concept of trauma-informed practice is the emphasis that's given to empowering staff. Um, and therefore, with this session, we'll actually discuss the trauma. You can say the webinar series really discuss the trauma that's actually involved in providing healthcare. And the key thing that I want to make a note of here is trauma, because of how powerful it can be, whether the trauma that we witness and encounter on the road or in our own lives, it can be a powerful lens that shapes our performance and practice. And I'll elaborate on why throughout tonight's session. If anyone wants to find out anything more about trauma-informed practice, interestingly enough, with the UK government, I realize there's an international audience here, but there's an Office for Health Improvement and Disparities. I had no idea it existed, but a couple of years ago, they developed some guidance that's still being in development, but there's a working definition. But it's quite interesting if anyone wants to find out anything more. But I won't be talking more about this concept for the rest of the evening. I'll just touch up on it. And then a couple of more social theories, a theory of performativity. So performative theory is a long-standing social theory, and it basically talks about the role of language in shaping our interactions every day across society with people. When it comes to identity, it's actually got its roots in a lot of research done by a philosopher known as Judith Butler, who talked about gender in particular. But essentially, what it talks about is identity is formed is socially constructed through interactions. It's not innate. It's not something that exists within us, but it varies according to the role, setting, and context. Bringing that across as healthcare practitioners, what does it mean? I use this theory to inform everything that I'm going to talk about in saying that healthcare practice is a performance. So as practitioners, when I look through the chat, I didn't see a whole lot of roles. I know we've got nurses. I imagine we've got paramedics. But when you get in your role as a practitioner, you will take on a persona. You are performing a role, and that will change according to the setting and the context, the patient that you're with, whether you're in hospital, out of hospital, and it's not only the title that defines and shapes how you perform, but it'll also be the people who are with you, your level of experience, and that will change over time. Um, but yeah, it's an important theory to mention, and uh, building on from that, one that I'm gonna talk about is the dramaturgical model, but it basically breaks down the format of the rest of the session. And it was something that was developed by Irving Goffman back in 1959. But again, it develops this notion of role setting context, how the interactions that we have are shaped by time, place, people of an audience. And Goffman basically talked about how we have three stages. You have the front stage, backstage, and off stage. And so this is how I've translated the model into what I'm going to talk about. So I've essentially used this model like I've done with the emotional cycle of healthcare provision. It's about giving people a framework, a roadmap to be able to identify where emotions are in our practice. So, like I've done with the cycle of healthcare provision, you have your before, during, and after. We can each map that out because we all go through them phases and stages. Now, this model actually breaks it down into regions. So you can say the patient encounter part one was mainly focused on the front stage. It's what we do during patient encounters. When I'm talking about going beyond the scenes, beyond that cycle, it's not only going to be talking about what happens before and after patient encounters. So the preparation phase, the processing phase, but it's also going beyond the cycle. So it's starting to look at the work environment and the interactions that we have in the workplace. And then the third region that Goffman talked about was offstage. So is away from the physical environment of our work, is going into our personal lives. So for the rest of the session, when I'm talking about going beyond the scenes, it's talking about all the different dynamics that we experience that are formulated in these regions, how they actually shape our practice. So yeah, let's delve into it then. So there, just a quick visual depiction, just bringing it back to the model. This is the front stage. It's just that during. It's that emotional labor. It's that interaction with the patient. So just to quickly summarize before I delve into, I'm going to go onto backstage next. But just to summarize, trauma are intense experiences and they're a powerful lens. They will shape our practice. Um, and performativity talks about practice as a performance. So we don't just follow our degrees, our courses, our education, and just just practice exactly what we're taught. We perform it according to our own identity, our own personalities, and it will always change according to context. And dramaturgy, it basically breaks down our practice, so we get a holistic overview of it across different stages, across different regions. So you got your front stage, a backstage, and your off stage. So here's a quick development, just another depiction again, just to break down more about what I mean about beyond the scenes. So again, you've got the model in the center, the cycle of healthcare provision, the patient encounter, that's your front stage. Okay. And now then you got the backstage, which is talking about not only before and after, but it's going to be talking about the workplace, the work environment, the interactions, etc. And then you've got the off stage that's going away from the realm of work. It will make more sense as we go on, and I'll keep coming back to the model. So don't worry if it's not making complete sense right now. It will as we go on. So just to break down what I mean by backstage, I'll be focusing on the systems. So again, the work environment and the interactions that happen there. Um, and these are the key things that I'll be talking about in this section. So it's talking about the workplace. So features of the workplace that shape our performance and practice, and that are emotionally loaded. Well-being culture in pre-hospital care, performance culture in pre-hospital care, and then the political context. So these are all the things we're still in our workplace environment and setting, but these are all things that are actually shaping our performance and practice. And again, it's highlighting all these non-clinical dynamics that actually are quite crucial, but we just don't really identify them and talk about them a lot. So when I this session actually as a standalone session is new. You could say it's an exclusive first time. Before part one was a standalone session, but I felt like there wasn't enough time to talk about all this, and it's actually really, really important. And there's so many things that you can really identify here. I'm not going to, I'll be touching upon some of these, but not all of these. But these are some of the things, some of the challenges, some of the experiences, some of the components of what consists of backstage. And there's a lot of things here, isn't there? Not only related to clinical practice and how effective it is, but it's about policies, it's about pay, it's interactions between staff, it's conflicts, there's guidelines, it's retention, it's how people feel in the workplace. And again, just looking into things a bit more here, quick for the mind map. Um, uh, it's training, it's kit, it's that balance between work and life that I'm going to talk about a lot. It's power and relationships. It's the type of calls that we go to. So when you think about it, We always have that emphasis on the patient encounter. Again, going back to my blurb, and the whole purpose of these sessions is we give so much emphasis, to the clinical aspects. We're always talking about um, the medicines, or an intervention or a procedure or the clinical knowledge. But when you think about everything that's actually going on around the patient interaction, there's so many things that will actually shape and influence our role in the workplace and our performance. So it's really helpful to map it out and break it down. So like I said, four things I'm going to focus on in terms of the backstage. What is the workplace? So when we're talking about pre-hospital care, um, we're talking about the station, the training room, could be the crew room where people have their breaks. It could be the office or the control room. So say if you're in a managerial role or have a managerial day, or if you're like me and one of my roles, actually work in the control room for London Ambulance Service. Again, it's a different setting where we'd always have our headsets on and receiving calls, but again, nevertheless, it's the workplace. Or you can have virtual spaces. We have so much training now virtually, don't we? And it's also communications, welfare facilities, storage, changing wash facilities, food provision, and then accessibility, parking, public transport, public visibility. Now, you might be thinking, why am I talking about all these things? But when you think about it, everyone can ask themselves right now, when you're at work, in between jobs, or when you start or end a shift, what kind of things are people often talking about? They will be talking about these things. Oh, there's a problem with this. Oh, I wish we had more of this. Oh, this is working really well. When all these things are working well, they're optimized, people feel a lot more settled, like they can actually perform well. So they are important things to really identify. So again, they do impact our performance. Secondly, well-being culture. Now, you can have a whole session just focusing on this in terms of well-being in pre-hospital care. Again, when I asked people to think about the top three things that they think affects their performance in practice, I'm sure something related to well-being would have come up. And in a nutshell, I think we can safely say that there's kind of been a shift in culture, or we exist on this continuum from like stoicism to self-care. So, stoicism, traditionally pre-hospital care, has been heavily male dominated, and there's been this culture of being rational, strong, non-emotive, clinical, surgical. So anything around emotion, like I said, the elephant on the road is generally been taboo. It's been avoided. So you've had this kind of avoidance culture. Emotion is being seen as weakness, and there's been this unhealthy culture of people just persisting and persevering through things, rather than actually addressing and dealing with it and processing it. And now we're having this shift towards self-care, where a lot of the well-being language and discourse and the initiatives are around either people accessing counseling or workshops or the therapies, or there's a lot of evidence around peer support, but it's also being advocated strongly. So, for instance, a couple of years ago, the College of Paramedics, alongside of the other emergency blue light services here in the UK. So you had your fire and police. There was an emergency mental health services symposium, and this was a common theme throughout the symposium about peer support, about its effectiveness. But as I'll delve into a bit more. These have their drawbacks. They have their caveats as well. But right now it kind of maps the culture around well-being, um, and as I said, because some of these measures aren't really entirely effective, you're still getting, and moreover, the fact that you still have this stoicism existing in many ways, you still got a lot of people whose well-being in the workplace isn't great. So, in a nutshell, there needs to be a shift in the culture around well-being. But yeah, this is again something around backstage. So yeah, I forgot about the second slide. But one question mark to ask then in terms of self-care is the emphasis on individuals changing their behavior and mindset too heavy? So a lot of people um, criticize this self-care approach. Some people become disillusioned with anything well-being in the workplace, for example, in ambulance services, because they feel there is this heavy emphasis on people going away. Like people are here tonight doing some CPD, people are going away from the workplace and doing things. And it's all about changing themselves when people will argue things need to actually change at a system level. So that's one criticism. Again, a big thing around cultural well-being is the morale and there's a relationship between staff. The social and emotional aspects, again, we're talking non-clinical, hugely shape our dynamics when we're on scene, and how effectively we can do things between each other and how well we can perform. And again, we've got a big thing right now. One thing that probably marks the culture really is how prominent things around fatigue and burnout or sickness are. But moreover, in terms of recognition, people feeling valued, appreciated, respected part of the team. Um, Sadly, people feeling dehumanized. It can be a common thing, feeling like just another number. I don't know if any NHS colleagues will recall, but I think has it been national the survey recently, and it was interesting. A lot of questions actually centered around this in terms of well-being, people feeling valued and respected. But again, it's a big part of the culture. Do we actually value each other? Do we show appreciation and respect to one another? Um, Third thing in terms of a dynamic backstage is performance culture. So again, you can argue that sometimes there is actually like a conflict between like performance metrics and staff well-being. So like I talked about last session, when talking about emotional labor, there's always this conflict between performing emotional labor and actually how long you are on scene. Times are such a huge performance metric, especially in pre-hospital care, and we're always therefore um, highly valuing and actually praising things that when they're done quicker. But is that really the best thing for patients, but also for staff? And that leads me on to the second thing. Are we prioritizing the right indicators, right outcomes for both staff and patients? But moreover, what is actually being encouraged among staff when it comes to performance? So whether you're out on the road, um, or again in the control room or whatever, when people are having conversations amongst each other, when we talk about cultures, we're talking about what's the norms, what's the values, what are we encouraging amongst each other? Are we being shaped too much by the pressures and demands where, for us it's also becoming about getting people out of the door quickly, or are we actually encouraging providing more effective care at the best outcome for us and for our patients? It's a bit of both. It's a bit of everything, but again, nevertheless, it's a really important question to ask, because it does again shape our performance in practice. And these are conversations that happen quite often. Moral injury, again, so many people in terms of our performance and culture. Um, we encounter so many dilemmas where we're asking, what is the right thing to do and how does it sit with my own values and my own morals. Um, and it can be shaped by the culture, what's normal in that setting, in that workplace. What's the done thing in pre-hospital care on the truck with your colleagues, which leads on to this thing that I think really marks the culture right now in pre-hospital care, this mismatch between training guidelines, policies, and practice. You'll often get it from people saying, "Oh yeah, there's a new guideline. Oh yeah, they changed this." Or the one that I've heard a lot over the years is, "Oh yeah, there's a new manager in place. Oh, there's a new team in place, so they have to change it again, don't they?" And then when you get another team, they'll go back to what they were doing before. But what I'm trying to say here is, one thing that could be marking the culture is this idea, and there is some kind of validity to it, but it's not entirely correct. But how, oh yeah, although you got the guidelines and training that says this, really, this is what we've always done in practice. And again, that's something to really question about the cultural performance in a workplace, how trusting people are in the guidelines and the policies. and how they let it shape the practice. And quite often that could be shaped by emotions. If people are feeling so low in morale and not valued, then they're more likely to adopt their own techniques and strategies and procedures rather than follow guidelines. Um, so yeah, that's an ongoing dynamic. And the last thing to mention here in terms of backstage is the political context. So in the UK, in the last 15 years, there's been so many policy changes. And one of the key things you can say, I think, especially in the 5 years, is this increasing scope of practice. So in ambulance services, they're not only emergency services anymore. They don't only provide emergency care, but they provide emergency and urgent care, and that change has led to such a big shift in what's going on backstage in terms of our scope, what we're expected to do. And again, a lot of people still have a conflict about that. Should they be at this call? Should they be seeing these people? But another thing that's marked the last 15 years with a lot of the, again, political changes is increasing workload. So you can almost argue because of changes with youth provision, social care, again, going on to that third point, rapidly changing socio-economic aspects of living, cost of living crisis, different, more precarious types of employment, more challenges with housing. There's a lot of factors that are basically contributing to our increasing workload. It's got to the point where when people can't access any services or provisions, they do end up with an emergency service. It can be police, it can be fire, it can be pre-hospital care, moreover the ambulances. These are all politically influenced because of all the policy changes that are going on over the last few years. And again, now we've had a change of government this year, and with that change of government, there's going to be a lot of new ideas. So it's a good time to really appreciate how the political context and the policies actually shape our performance and practice. So going on to the last point, there's always a question of, do staff really understand and appreciate these dynamics when receiving inappropriate calls and jobs? Because of how wider society has been shifting and evolving, um, like I said, it's changed our workload, why people come to us, the types of people that come to us. And in terms of exemplifying it, going to our performance and practice quite often, and I've probably been in the position myself odd time, but you'll end up in a situation or with a call and like, why am I here? What am I doing here? But sometimes it requires that understanding of the wider context to really appreciate why you're there in that. Maybe this is the wider reason why people ended up in this situation, or why they've ended up coming to us, or we've gone to them. And that's really important to know, because sometimes without that understanding, people can get frustrated with the patients that we see, but it's not entirely their fault. And it's not colleagues' fault. So it's really important to have that understanding of a wider political context. But I can appreciate not a lot of people have that because it does require that acumen. But yeah, so then this is another thing that marks backstage. So just to quickly summarize then, firstly, workplace. Adequate provisions, whether there's adequate or not, will affect our performance and our practice. The well-being culture as well. Again, how we're valued and looked after as staff. Whether there's enough recognition of the challenges that we experience with our well-being, and if enough is actually being done about it. Performance culture, another aspect of what's going on backstage. What are we really valuing with our practice? Are we really capturing the right things when it comes to monitoring and evaluation? And analysis, and then the political context where we operate, healthcare in general, but moreover pre-hospital care. We operate in a rapidly evolving industry that's massively shaped by a lot of policies that are being formed at local, regional, and national level. Okay, so I'm just going to take a quick sip. Um, as we head into the final stage of the session. So beyond the scenes, I'm just going to talk about off stage now. So we've covered front stage mainly in part one. I've talked about backstage, and now we're going to go off stage. And what exactly is off stage? It's taken us away from the physical environment of work. And direct interactions pertaining to work. So it's going into the realm of people's personal lives. And this is so important to really discuss and capture, because there is an inextricable dynamic that happens between work and life. And when you're in healthcare, that dynamic is so much more, what's the word I'm looking for? Sensitive, dynamic. It requires a lot more supervision and management. So on that note, these are the four areas I'm going to quickly talk about. So first of all, work-life balance, and how that shapes our performance practice. I'm going to talk about the journey, so how being in healthcare actually shapes who we are as people, uh, the importance of people's personal incentives and motivations, and then talking a bit more about people's personal life. So firstly, when we talk about work-life balance, just to identify the obvious things, time, so shift patterns and rotas, of course, have a big influence. Self-awareness. So when we're talking about balance, knowing those signs, triggers, and being able to address them, that's a big thing when it comes to work-life balance. Like I talked about when it came to emotional processing, with the emotional cycle. And that can be a real challenge, but it does really shape how well we're able to perform, if we can identify and address those. But moreover, like, how do people set boundaries? So what interactions will help people have with colleagues away from work? Again, this is really important in terms of work-life balance. How do we separate our life away from work? But moreover, how much of this, yourself do you, away from work, do you actually bring into work? So personal trauma and experiences. I'll talk about that a bit more. But as I mentioned, when it came to part one, we do this. Um, when it comes to preparation, first of all. So, like I said, if we've not received training and education, regarding certain encounters, we're going to draw upon our own personal experiences. If we've had a bad experience around a certain patient group, for instance, then that might create a lot of anxiety when we go into a job. But moreover, when it comes to processing, if we've not really received training and support when it comes to techniques and strategies, then people are going to draw upon their own experiences. Um, the big thing I think really needs to be talked about when it comes to work-life balance is power and people becoming too invested in work. So I don't think this is something that's really talked about a lot, but when it is discussed, I think people can find many examples they can really identify. But one of the challenges I think we have is when people become too invested in work is sometimes people can use the workplace as an opportunity to fulfill unmet needs away from work. So, say for instance, if people are feeling low in confidence or in self-esteem, or don't have many healthy relationships where they feel valued and respected. Um, Sometimes you can have situations where people are with patients or working with colleagues, and because you've got that skewed work-life balance, work becomes so much more than providing that care. And you can have many situations where people will do things that are more about themselves and their own well-being rather than what's best for the patient. And I think you can identify a lot of situations where you've had ineffective care, or things have gone wrong, or people have been disciplined, and usually this has been because of this dynamic where people just don't have this healthy work-life balance. But moreover, when it comes to the concept of patient-centered care, patient and family-centered care, when I talked about trauma and those intense experiences, in to really be effectively empathetic and compassionate, we need to be able to take ourselves out of a situation, and really s- um, identify what's really important to the person and what a situation means to them. And when I said about trauma being a lens, sometimes what you can end up occurring, and it really shapes our performance of practice, is because people have had a similar experience and they may not been able to process it. They end up imposing their own values or their own similar experience on the situation, and that can be not only damaging for them but for patients and families themselves. So it's a really complex dynamic that requires a lot of emotional intelligence, really. But it's a dynamic that we encounter so often, especially because of the complexities of pre-hospital care. Another thing off stage that really shapes our performance and practices. Um, Actually, that was another slide. The job transforms who people are in different ways. So how we perceive the world, how we perceive people, certain events, activities, the language we use. So for instance, I know myself, because of a lot of the calls that I've had going to nightclubs, for instance, and drinking, etc. That's kind of shaped my interpretation of what I see as those spaces. But yeah, being in healthcare and meeting so many people and seeing how they live in, it really informs our understanding of the world, and that will shape our well-being and our performance. So ultimately, our experience in healthcare, it is education, but moreover, our thresholds will contrast to everyday people. So this is a really good example, and I'll talk about pain management. But because we encounter so many situations of people being unwell, our threshold can be quite high compared to people. So we can receive the same presentation of something so many times, but quite often we can forget that for that person it may be the first time or maybe new to them. But nevertheless, all these experiences do shape how we live our life away from work, and then you've got this dynamic going back and forth. But moreover, it can shape how we are, the relationships we have with people. So sometimes if you go home from work and you like someone to be able to understand what life was for you or what a situation was, you won't always get that understanding because um, our experiences are unique. We have different thresholds. Um, um, of- uh, Second last thing, incentives and motivations. So why people come into the job and why people remain in healthcare are emotionally loaded. There's not always a rational clinical decision, but nevertheless, it will shape the decisions that we make out on the road. So, like I said, can be informed by personal experiences and trauma. People want to make a difference. That can always be influencing them in the back of their head. It's not just a clinical assessment or an outcome or a guideline or this indication criteria. It will be these personal experiences, motivations, incentives. And it leads to the question: is it a good thing or a bad thing? However you're going to label it, it's what manifests in reality. People are influenced by their own motives and incentives. And lastly, the personal. So these things also shape. These things happen off stage, and they shape our performance and practice. So, first of all, the relationship people have with oneself beyond self care. Not only, yeah, in terms of like looking after themselves, but again that awareness of why they're in a job, how they are living, but also how they're able to manage that balance, and identify when things aren't going well. um Speaking of the personal, a lot of this actually featured in a lot of the research from the Penny Management dissertation when it talks about relationships away from work, and when I talk about beyond the scenes. There's a lot of research and evidence demonstrating how there's a lot of conflicts and breakdowns people can experience because of what they encounter at work. And when they go away from work, either not being able to surrounded by people who understand or able to support them, or just not have those strategies to be able to process things. And if you are having that conflict and breakdown, not only is your well-being not going to be great in the workplace, but you're not going to be able to perform well. And the last thing to mention here is being emotionally available away from work is such a big challenge because of the amount of labor and processing required. For example, I don't know why as doctors I've heard it from so many years, having treated children of doctors, quite often you'd always have a joke said, oh yeah, if I tell my mum or dad this, they'll just go tell me to sort it out myself, etc. Although it could be something um significant. But the point I'm trying to make here is again about thresholds, but also how much energy and labor is required from the job. Um, not being able to be available for people can be damaging for your own well-being away from work. But moreover, there's a point to make here. How much do we actually have to do away from work to be ready for work? Like I mentioned in an earlier slide, um, like processing, for instance, it does require people doing things. Is it really fair? I'm not just talking about practical logistical things, like getting ready for work and planning meals, etc. But all this that we do in terms of labor and processing alongside CPD, it does shape our performance and practice, but it's not already recognized. When I was talking about performative theory and Judith Butler, a lot of what's talked around in terms of identity and feminism talks about this dual burden, how there's the paid work and unpaid work, but ultimately we all do this unpaid work away from the workplace setting, and it does shape our performance practice. Just it happens, but it's not always being identified and acknowledged. So yeah, just to summarize, there are blurred boundaries when it comes to pre-hospital care in terms of work-life balance, and it has a huge impact on our performance and practice. Um, uh, our experience in healthcare shapes how we live away from healthcare, how we understand and view the world and people, why we came into healthcare, why we remain in healthcare. And when it comes to the personal, we therefore um, have these challenges when it comes to relationships and processing, um, and how we live our lives. So, in summary, I realize I'm running low on time, but the bottom line, well, the core purpose of this webinar series has been to provide frameworks to help people map emotions in pre-hospital care. So, first you've had the cycle of healthcare provision, and now you've had beyond the scenes where we've talked about how the whole healthcare experience can be mapped into regions. I hope I've demonstrated how emotions are fundamental to pre-hospital care. They shape our well-being and performance. You can't take them apart. We need to be well in order to be able to perform. And it's not only affected by what we do when we're with patients, but it's also before and after and beyond. So there's so many different system level dynamics that shape our performance and practice, both clinical and non-clinical. And the key thing is, in order for a lot of the challenges that practitioners experience, there needs to really be change at a system level, because right now there's a lot of unfair and ineffective emphasis on individuals to come up with their own way, do their own thing, do a lot away from work, and we're still having huge challenges. So again, I summarized that there. There needs to be an intervention and empowerment more at system level, and a change in culture really. So there is scope for a future research in the UK. A lot of the research probably exists in a lot of other settings right now when it comes to emotions in healthcare. But bottom line is empowering practitioners so they can develop their own measures, techniques, and strategies when it comes to labor and processing, and having sessions like this so people can identify what's going on in and beyond the workplace that really affects their performance and practice. So yeah, here quick signposting again, if there's anyone you want to speak to, if anything during the session has triggered any unwanted emotions or feelings and thoughts, there's a whole range of organizations you can reach out to. And if anyone's got any comments, ideas, or questions, please, any feedback, please get in touch. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we can keep building and having more conversations around these type of topics and issues. So thank you very much for staying with me throughout the whole session. And I hope you've all found it useful. So thank you.
I'm done coughing. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Wasim. So yes, as as you pointed out, it's something that does need to be spoken about. Mental health is health at the end of the day, and just as important as the physical side of everybody's work. So, as always, it is now time for questions. So, if anyone does have any questions, please do pop them in to the Q&A box or pop them into the chat. I'm looking at them both at the moment, so I'll be able to see anything that comes through. However, just before we move on to the Q&A section, I do just want to draw attention, as always, to our next webinar, which is happening the day before my 32nd birthday. So come and celebrate my 32nd birthday with me on Thursday, November the 21st at 8 o'clock. We are going to be joined by Kim Gregory, fresh off the back of the Paris Paralympics. So she is going to be joining us to talk all about their experiences there, sort of the challenges and the obstacles that were faced, especially in an environment like the Paralympics, where, as you can see on the photo, lots of things happen. And if you watched it, lots of things did happen, especially during the cycling. So do consider joining us for that. It's very relevant to exactly what's happened this year. And if you are not, I repeat, not a trauma care member, this is your chance to get your CPD certificate. So do scan the QR code that's on your screen now. I'm just going to pop my glasses on so I can read these questions because they're very small on my screen. So this is your chance to scan the QR code and purchase a certificate for £199. However, as I mentioned at the top, if you do want to become a member between now and the morning, you will not have to scan this QR code and you will be sent one free of charge tomorrow. So, excuse me. Suzanne, oh, hello, Suzanne. Good to see you again. So Suzanne has asked, is there a role for peer support?
Yeah, definitely. Again, as mentioned, there's a lot of evidence underpinning the value and significance of peer support, and it is something that's actually being pushed in a lot of settings and contexts. Because again, as I was talking about, in the workplace, and then people away from the workplace would already appreciate the dynamics. When you've got peers, there's so many things that you don't really have to explain to one another, so you already got that shared understanding. And definitely, so yeah, in a nutshell, there is a role for peer support, but I think we also need to be careful in putting too much responsibility on people to be there to support one another, because you might have instances where if people are struggling with their own well-being, are they really in a position to support another person? But moreover, you still get the taboo and stigma and that stoicism where people don't really want to let on that they might be having struggles and challenges, and therefore they still um, they they need that option away from peer support, and you still get a lot of situations where that's not available. So, in a nutshell, yes, there is a role for peer support, but I don't think it's enough to rely upon that solely, or put that as a key core strategy.
Perfect. And Thomas has asked, it's a rather long question, but very, very relevant. So, Thomas, thank you for your comments and question at the end here. You talk about the current well-being systems that includes TRIM. I feel that this is often, at least in their experience, focused at incidents that are potentially seen as horrific. That managers will generally automate it if they feel it meets a specific level of bad. I feel that these incidents are the ones that I've been most prepared to deal with, whereas what you refer to as inappropriate incidents often cause the highest moral injury, especially as we work on low feedback systems. Do you think that the snowball effect of these moral injuries should be better built into well-being systems?
Yeah, I totally agree with the point you're making there, Thomas. Like saying, the emphasis is always given to those trauma critical care jobs, but it's all relative. What will actually impact someone adversely or negatively? So I think there needs to be, as you've said, something incorporated into well-being systems where the emphasis is put more on people being able to identify and convey what has actually impacted them traumatically, and therefore they can actually receive support for that. So we put less emphasis on certain incidents and events, and more on people, individual practitioners themselves. So it's actually driven more by people's own experiences. So we get away from this always targeting certain incidents.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And as always, if you do have any questions, because I'm going to do my usual now, which is bob along to the next slide to start thanking the sponsors. But if you do have anything, I will go straight back to the questions. So please do get anything in that you might have on your mind. No question is too small or too silly. So, as always, a huge thank you to our sponsors, our other sponsors, as well as Slater and Gordon, our first aid sponsors, QualSafe. We've just spent a wonderful weekend with them over in Glasgow, and they are putting together our first aid program as well for the 27th annual conference. Toby and Nigel and the gang, Martin, the lot of them are so wonderful. They're brilliant people, and what they do as well is also fantastic. They have loads of courses available, so do scan the QR code that's on your screen now, or go to QualSafe. Ignore the awards, I need to change that. Just qualsafe.org, and you can find out more about the courses that they have available. And of course, as always, thank you to our long-standing sponsors, Galen. Can't talk too much about them as I'm not qualified, nor am I allowed to, depending on the audience. However, do go to galen-pharma.com to find out more about all the products that they have available, many of which you probably already use in practice without realizing they are from Galen. However, if you go onto their website and click on the I am a medical professional section, you can find all the guidelines, all the things that they've got upcoming, all the things that they're working on there as well. And as well as that, they will be they're not there this weekend, but they will be with us in March as always. So do come along and say hello to them as per usual. And from myself and from Wasim, that is everything for this evening. As always, to all of you, thank you for joining us and taking time out of your very busy schedules to be with us this evening and listen to an all-important talk about maybe the side of trauma and trauma care that we don't often talk about, but should. So wherever you are in the world, thank you very much for joining us. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And Wasim, if you would like to say anything or any final thoughts from yourself.
Not much more really. Again, thank you very much for everyone for tuning in, engaging, and please do follow up if you've got any ideas or thoughts or comments or feedback. It's really important we continue the conversation and build upon these sessions and anything similar that's going on right now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Wasim. So, as always, thank you very much, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Enjoy the rest of your evening or your day, and good night.